901, Return, Sing, Iopian. Ver 1. This was the usual cry of the hunters, who thus addressed Apollo, the god of the chase, when the prey had been captured. Iu the toils. See the Metamorphoses, Book 4. 1, 5-13. "902, Return, Amyclae. Ver 5. A town of Laconia. See the Metamorphoses, Book X, 1, 219, and the note. "903, Return, Arato. Ver 16. He addresses himself to this muse, as her name was derived from the Greek love. It has been suggested that he had another reason for addressing her, as she was thought to take pleasure in warfare, a state which sometimes, by way of variety, exists between lovers. "904, Return, A Bold Path. Ver 22. This story is again related in the 8th book of the Metamorphoses. "905, Return, like Ars. Ver 45. He aptly compares the arrangement of the main feathers of a wing to a row of oars. "906, Return, Orion. Ver 56. So in the Metamorphoses, Book V1, 206, he says to his son Icarus, Fly between both, and I bid thee neither to look at Boötes, nor Hellas, nor the drawn sword of Orion. "907, Return, is angling. Ver 77. There is a similar passage in the Metamorphoses, 1. 216. "908, Return, the clarion god. Ver 80. See the Fasti, Book I 1, 20, and the note. "909, Return, and Calamnut. Ver 81. These pieces are mentioned in the corresponding passages in the Metamorphoses, Book 8. 1, 222. "910, Return, Astypolia. Ver 82. This was an isle in the group of the Sporades, between Crete and the Cyclades. It contained but one city, and was long and narrow, and of rugged appearance. "911, Return, the young horse. Ver 100. See the moves. Book IL 81, 8, and the note. "912, Return, the Marsian spells. Ver 102. The Nania was a mournful dirge or chaunt uttered by the sorcerer in his incantations. On the Marsi, see the 6th book of the Fasti, 1, 142, and the note to the passage. "913, Return, causing paleness. Ver 105. Philters were noxious potions, made of venomous or stimulating ingredients, prescribed as a means of gaining the affections of the person to whom they were administered. "914, Return, Nereus. Ver 109. See the Pontic Epistles, Book 4. EP 13. 1, 16, and the note to the passage. "915, Return, Charming Hylas. Ver 110. See the Tristia, Book 2. 1. "916, Return, Ocean Goddesses. Ver 124. Calypso was really the only sea goddess that was enamored of Ulysses. Circe was not a sea goddess. 917, Return, Blood of Dolan. Ver 135. See the Metamorphoses, Book 13. Line 244. (918) Return, Jamontan Horses, Ver 136. The Steeds of Achilles. (919) Return, the Chanian bird. Ver 150. Chania was a district of Epirus, said to have been so called from Chaon, a Trojan. Dodona was in Epirus, and in its forests were said to be doves that had the gift of prophecy. See the translation of the Metamorphoses, pages 467-8. (920) Return, Resort to Law. Ver 151. He means to say, let man and wife be always thinking about resorting to law to procure a divorce. (921) Return, 1 gave verses. Ver 166. He intends a pun here. Verb adare is to deceive, but literally it means to give words. See the Immerse, Book I, L8. 157. (922) Return, Atlanta of Nonachrist, Ver 185. See the Immerse, Book 3. L2. 29, and the note. (923) Return, Bow of Hilcius. Ver 191. Hylias and Rhecus were centaurs, who were pierced by Atlanta with her arrows, for making an attempt on her chastity. He alludes to the bow of Cupid in the next line. (924) Return, the ivory cubes. Ver 203. He alludes to throws of the tali and tessera, which were different kinds of dice. See the note to 1. Footnote 471 of the second book of the Tristia. In this line he seems to mean the tessera, which were similar to our dice, while the tali, which he next mentions, had only 4 flat surfaces, being made in imitation of the knuckle bones of animals, and having 2 sides uneven and rounded. The dice were thrown on a table, made for the purpose, with an elevated rim. Some throws, like our doublets, are supposed to have counted for more than the number turned up. The most fortunate throw was called Venus, or Venereus Jactus. It is thought to have consisted of a combination, making 14, the dice presenting different numbers. Games with dice were only sanctioned by law as a pastime during meals. (925) Return, Make bad moves. Ver 204. Dare jacta means to move the throws, in allusion to the game of duodecim scripta, or 12 points, which was played with counters moved according to the throws of the dice, probably in a manner not unlike our game of backgammon. The hoard was marked with 12 lines, on which the pieces moved. (926) Return, or if you are throwing it, Ver 205. By the use of the word seu, or, we must suppose that he has, under the word numeri, alluded to the game with the tesserae, or 6-sided dice. (927) Return, the game that imitates. Ver 207. He here alludes to the ludus latrunculorum, literally the game of theft, which is supposed to have been somewhat similar to our chess. He refers to its name in the words latrociniae sub imagine. The game was supposed to imitate the furtive stratagems of warfare, hence the men, which were usually styled calculi, were also called by the name of latrones, latrunculi, militas, bellatores, thieves, little thieves, soldiers, warriors. As we see by the next line, they were usually made of glass, though sometimes more costly materials were employed. The skill of this game consisted either in taking the pieces of the adversary, or rendering them unable to move. The first was done when the adversary's piece was brought by the other between two of his own. See the Tristia, Book 2. 1.477. The second took place when the pieces were legati, or ad insidas redacti, brought upon the last line and unable to move. White and red are supposed to have been the color of the men. This game was much played by the Roman ladies and nobles. (928) Return, hold the screen at ver 209. The ancients used umbracula, or screens against the weather, resembling our umbrellas, which the Greeks called. They were used generally for the same purposes as our parasols, a protection against the heat of the sun. They seem not to have been in general carried by the ladies themselves, but by female slaves, who held them over their mistresses. See the Fasti, Book 2. 209. These screens, or umbrellas, were much used by the Roman ladies in the amphitheatre, to protect them from sun and rain, when the velarium, or awning, was not extended. (929) Return, tasteful couch. Ver 211. This was probably the triclinium on which they reposed at meals. The shoes were taken off before reclining on it. Female slaves did this office for the ladies, and males for the men. (930) Return, looking last at ver 216. These were generally held by female slaves, when used by their mistresses. See the Metamorphoses, Book 4. 349, and the note. (931) Return, held the workbasket. Ver 219. Hercules, who wiled the serpents sent by Juno, is reproached for doing this, by Deianira in her epistle. (932) Return, as though a servant. Ver 228. He is to be ready, if his mistress goes to a party, to act the part of the slave, who was called adversator, whose duty it was to escort his master home in the evening, if it was dark, with a lighted torch. (933) Return, a vehicle. Ver 230. Rota, a wheel, is, by synecdoche, used to signify a vehicle. (934) Return, Cynthius. Ver 240. See the note to line 51, of the Epistle from Anon to Paris. (935) Return, through the open roof. Ver 245. He gives a somewhat hazardous piece of advice here, as he instructs him to obtain admission by climbing up the wall, and getting in at the skylight, which extended over the atrium, or court, a room which occupied the middle of the house. The Roman houses had, in general, but one story over the ground floor. (936) Return, a high window. Ver 246. This passage may be illustrated by the note to 1:752, of Book 14. Of the Metamorphoses. (937) Return, day on which. Ver 257. He alluded to a festival celebrated by the servants, on the Capertine Nones, the 7th of July, when they sacrificed to Juno Capertina. Macrobius says that the servants sacrificed to Juno under a wild fig tree, called Caprificus, in memory of the service done by the female slaves, in exposing themselves to the lustoti the enemy, for the public welfare. The Gauls being driven from the city, the neighboring nations chose the dictator of the Fidenates for their chief, and, marching to Rome, demanded of the Senate, that if they would save their city, they should send out to them their wives and daughters. The Senate, knowing their own weakness, were much perplexed, when a handmaid, named Tutela, or Philotas, offered, with some others, to go out to the enemy in disguise. Being, accordingly, dressed like free women, they repaired in tears to the camp of the enemy. They soon induced their new acquaintances to drink, on the pretense that they were bound to consider the day as a festival, and when intoxicated, a signal was given, from a fig tree near, that the Romans should fall on them. The camp of the enemy was assailed, and most of them were slain. In return for their service, the female slaves were made free, and received marriage portion at the public expense. Another account, agreeing with the present passage, says that the Gauls were the enemy who made the demand, and that Ritana was the name of the female slave. Return, the lower classes de Virtu 59. Witness his own appeals in the Immerse to Nape, Cypassus, Bagus, and the porter. 939. Return, in the sacred street. Virtu 66. Presents of game and trout very often follow a similar devolution at the present day. Return, Amaryllis was so fond of de Virtu 67. He alludes to a line of Virgil, which, doubtless, was then well known to all persons of education. It occurs in the Eclogues, Castanis gnuses, mea quas Amaryllis amabat. Chestnuts, too, which my Amaryllis was so fond of. In the next line, he hints that the damsels of his day were too greedy to be satisfied with chestnuts only. 941. Return, thrush and a pigeon de Virtu 69. Probably live birds of the kind are here alluded to. Pliny tells us that they were trained to imitate the human voice. Thrushes were much esteemed as a delicacy for the table. They were sold tied up in clusters, in the shape of a crown. Return, by these means Virtu 71. He alludes to those who continue to slip into dead men's shoes, by making trifling presents of niceties. Juvenal inveighs against this practice. 943. Return, poetry does not de Virtu 74. See the remarks of Dipses in the Immerse, Book I L8. 157. 944. Return, only rich de Virtu 76. See the Immerse, Book 3. L2. 945. Return, Tyrian hue de Virtu 97. See the Fasti, Book 2. 107, and the note. 946. Return, of Cos, Virtu 98. See the Epistles of Sabinus, EP 3. 145, and the note. 947. Return, Address of Felt de Vir 300. Gauzape, Gausuppa, or Gauzapum, was a kind of thick woolly cloth, which had a long nap on one side. It was used to cover tables and beds, and as a protection against wind and rain. It was worn both by males and females, and came into use among the Romans about the time of Augustus. 948. Return, you were setting me on fire de Vir 301. Vermana deservedly censures the explanation of moves incendia, given by Crispinus, the Delphin editor, Vous mourrez de chaude, you will die of heat, applying the observation to the lady, and not, figuratively, to the feelings of her lover. 949. Return, her very embraces de Vir 308. The common reading of this line is clearly corrupt. Probably the reading is the one here adopted, itian dat, gaudia, voci proba. 950, return, what advice, ver 368. These attempts at argument are exhausted by Paris, in his epistle to Helen. 952, return, stinging nettle. Ver 417. Pliny prescribes nettle seed as a stimulating medicine, mixed with linseed, hyssop, and pepper. 953, return, white onion. Ver 421. The onions of Megara are praised by Cato, the agricultural writer. 954, return, Alcathoist. Ver 421. See the Metamorphoses, Book 7. 1. 955, return, at first. Ver 467. See the beginning of the first book of the Metamorphoses. 956, return, unclean mate. Ver 486. He alludes to the strong smell of the he-goat. 957, return, Machaon. Ver 491. He was a famous physician, son of Aesculapius, and was slain in the Trojan War. See the Tristia, book verses L. 6. 1, 11. 958, return, he came to, ver 496. Odeist seems a preferable reading to Agit. 959, return, to know himself. Verse 600. Know thyself, was a saying of Chilo, the Lacedaemonian, one of the wise men of Greece. This maxim was also inscribed in gold letters in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. Too much of nothing was a second maxim there inscribed, and a third was, misery is the consequence of debt and discord. "960, return, drinks with elegance. Ver 506. It is hard to say what art in drinking is here alluded to, whether a graceful air in holding the cup, or the ability of drinking much without shewing any signs of inebriety. Let the old woman come. Ver 329. In sickness it was the custom to purify the bed and chamber of the patient, with sulphur and eggs. It seems also to have been done when the patient was pining through unrequited love. Apuleius mentions a purification by the priest of Isis, who uses eggs and sulphur while holding a torch and repeating a prayer. The nurse of the patient seems here to be directed to perform the ceremony. "961, return, the Fasti, Book 2. 1, 19, and Book 4. 1, 728. From a passage of Juvenal, we find that it was a common practice to purify with eggs and sulphur, in the month of September, on Athos, ver 517. See the Metamorphoses, Book 2. 1, 217, and the note. "962, return, on Hybla. Ver 517. See the Tristia, book verses L 13. 1, 22. "963, return, off your head. Ver 528. Iphis, in the 14th book of the Metamorphoses, 1, 732, raises his eyes to the doorposts of his mistress, so often adorned by him with wreaths. "964, return, the senses. Ver 532. He seems to believe, with Nix and Dienelos, in the existence of a sixth sense. 965, Return of mighty Jove. Ver 540. He alludes to the triumphal procession to the capital. 966, Return, gentle sleep. Ver 546. See the Immerse, Book 3. Li 1. 51. He means to say that husbands give a certain latitude to their wives, who do not fail to improve upon it. 967, Return, own husband. Ver 551. See the Immerse, Book Il 4. 138. 968, Return, other men visit. Ver 554. Viri seems to be a better reading than Viro. 969, Return, Mars and Venus. Ver 562. See the Metamorphoses, Book 4. 173. 970, Return, says, laughing. Ver 585. See a similar passage in the Metamorphoses, Book 4. 187. 971, Return, fourth race. Ver 588. He was much venerated by the warlike Thracians. 972, Return, Paphos. Ver 588. See the Metamorphoses, Book X, 1. 298. 973, Return, Fire and Water rendered. Ver 598. Among the Romans, when the bride reached her husband's house, he received her with fire and water, which it was the custom for her to touch. This is, by some, supposed to have been symbolical of purification, or it was an expression of welcome, as the interdiction of fire and water was the formula for banishment. 974, Return, My Sallies. Ver 600. See Book L1, 31, and the note. See also the Fasti, Book 4. 866, and the note. 975, Return, The Rites of Ceres. Ver 601. He alludes to the mysterious rites of Ceres, in the island of Samothrace. 976, Return, not enclosed in chests. Ver 609. Certain chests were carried in the procession at the festival of Ceres, the contents of which, if there were any, was a mystery to the uninitiated. 977, Return, the left hand. Ver 614. This is the attitude of the Venus de Medicis. 978, Return, at a heavy price. Ver 626. Men spend their money on debauchery, only for the pleasure of talking of it. 979, Return, Waving Wings. Ver 644. He refers to Perseus admiring the swarthy Andromeda. 980, Return, of larger stature. Ver 645. She was remarkable for her height. 981, Return, Green Bark. Ver 639. He speaks of the slip engrafted in the stock. 982, Return, What consulship? Verse 663. The age of persons was reckoned by naming the consulship in which they were born, the period of which was known by reference to the Fasti Consulars. See the introduction to the Fasti. Return, rigid censor. Verse 664. It was the duty of the censor to make inquiries into the age of all individuals. Return, best years. Verse 666. Even in those days, it was considered ungallant to make too scrutinizing inquiries into the years of ladies of a certain age. 985, return, kind of warfare. Verse 674. See the Immerse, Book I, L9. 1:1. Return, besides in these. Verse 675. In reference to females of a more advanced age. 987, return, 7 times 5 years. Verse 694. He probably means, in this passage, a lustrum of 5 years. Berman justly observes that cito, quickly, or soon, can hardly be the proper reading, as it seems to contradict the meaning of the context. He suggests nisi, meaning but, or only. See the Fasti, Book 3. 1:166, and the note. Also the Tristia, Book 4. L16. 1:78. Return, stored up in the times. Verse 696. He uses this metaphorical expression to signify that he admires females when of a ripe and mature age. See the Immerse, Book 2. LV 1:54, and the note. 989, return, the shooting grass. Verse 698. In Nissard's translation, the words protonovella are rendered el herb nouvellement coupé, the grass newly cut. This is not the meaning of the passage. He intends to say that the grass just shooting up is apt to cut or prick the naked foot. Return, Hermione. Verse 699. She was the daughter of Helen and Menelaus. 991, return, gorged. Verse 700. She was the daughter of Altnea, and sister of Meleager. She married Andremon. 992, return, Podalirius. Verse 735. The brother of Machaon. See the Tristia book verses L13. 1:32. 993, return, Calchas. Verse 737. See the Metamorphoses. 994, return, Automaton. Verse 738. The son of Diores. He was the chariot of Achilles. 995, return, upon his spoil. Verse 744. It was the custom to write inscriptions on the spoil. See the notes to the Fasti, Book 2. 1:663.